You're listening to Spellbound. Welcome to episode 34 of Spellbound. I'm Julian Smith. Spellbound is now a CastBox original. Today's episode is sponsored in part by RX Bar. It's 1:30 on a weekday. You're in your car, you're trying to get somewhere, you're in a rush, traffic is a mess. All of a sudden, your tummy starts growling at you. Feed me, it says. An RX Bar is like a healthy meal that fits in your pocket. I absolutely love these things. I feel great eating them. They taste great. I love that the ingredients are prominently featured on the front of the package, so there's no mystery as to what you're putting in your mouth. From the moment you pick up an RX Bar, you know exactly what you're about to eat. There's simple ingredients, protein from the egg whites, energy from the dates, protein and healthy oils from the nuts, and ingredients like unsweetened chocolate, real fruit, spices like sea salt and cinnamon make each RX Bar a totally unique experience. RX Bars are gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, and contain no artificial colors, artificial flavors, preservatives, or fillers. And whether you prefer sweet or savory, chocolatey or fruity, there is definitely an RX Bar for you. My personal go-tos are the dark chocolate sea salt and the chocolate coconut. They've also got this new RX nut butter, great with fruit, rice cakes, pretzels, or straight out of the pouch if you're crazy. They're giving our listeners a special deal today, 25% off your first order. Visit rxbar.com/spellbound and enter the promo code spellbound at checkout. That's rxbar.com/spellbound, promo code spellbound. Without further ado, I give you the one and only Michael Shermer, renowned skeptic, science writer, editor-in-chief of Skeptic Magazine, and regular columnist for Scientific American. Also the best-selling author of Why People Believe Weird Things and Heavens on Earth most recently, and about a dozen other books. Michael, you're busy typing away at the keyboard. I appreciate you taking some time away to be with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to be here.
Also joined by Andrew Rader. He's got a PhD from MIT. He's an aerospace engineer, a TV know-it-all. We call him the fax machine on this show, and he's back in the house again.
I'm back.
That was a very obligatory I'm back. Now, Michael, you're an interesting person because you are a scientist and a writer, and you have a vast knowledge of history and anthropology, but you've chosen a very different path for your skill set because you've kind of made it your life's work to demystify superstitions of all kinds. Now, you were religious at one point, and you weren't raised in it like most religious people are. And then you deconverted from religion also as an adult, which is just unique. I feel like you don't see this. So what was your story?
I was into it for about 7 years, from high school through undergraduate at Pepperdine, which is a Church of Christ school, and into graduate school. I wasn't at a Christian school in graduate school. It was a state university, so I wasn't surrounded by fellow believers, and in fact, religion wasn't really even discussed, and no one seemed to care really one way or the other. And that creates an environment in which you can be more open-minded to different beliefs without fear of sanction or correction by your peer group or professors or whatever. You know, when you're surrounded by that, when you're in the bubble, it makes perfect sense. But when you're out of the bubble and you start exploring and it doesn't add up, it's much easier to let go when you don't have an environment like that. But for me, the problem of evil was always a big one. I never felt that theologians gave a good answer for why bad things happen to good people. And in here in particular, I'm talking about natural evil like earthquakes and tsunamis, things like that, or cancer in children. You know, why would God, an all-powerful God, allow that kind of thing to happen? And I still think there's no good answer to it. I think that is pretty much the strongest argument against God's existence. But since I'm a psychologist, social scientist, I was taking courses in anthropology and social psychology, and it became pretty clear that religious beliefs are distinctly culturally bound. And so where you have happened to have been born and raised, what time period in human history is very much going to determine what you think is real or true about God and the dogmas of the religion. So that to me told me that they can't all be right, or more precisely, they're probably all wrong. And at some point I just let it go.
I really enjoyed your book, and one of the things that I found really interesting was you said that even atheists and agnostics report a really high level of belief in an afterlife. I think it was 32% or something like that, and then it may be slanted towards agnostics or something like that, but what do you attribute that to?
Well, that was an interesting study, but of course it's not clear what people mean when they talk about immortality or an afterlife, and those surveys don't ask. And so I'm guessing that when an agnostic or atheist says, I think it's possible that you continue on after the death of your physical body. They have something in mind like the continuation of consciousness in a quantum field, or something like Deepak Chopra's Western Buddhism, New York City Buddhism, where consciousness is pervasive throughout the universe. It is as he says, the ground of all being. It is the ontological primitive. It is what gives rise to everything else, including material substance. And so that when you die, you physically die, you just go back to where you were in this pre-physical state. That's what some of these atheist agnostics probably believe. They surely don't believe the Christian heaven, because otherwise they wouldn't be atheist agnostics. So to be honest and fair, no one really knows what happens after you die. The default null hypothesis is that nothing happens. There is no soul. You don't go anywhere. You just return to where you were before you were born, which is to say, nowhere. And it's not going to be like sleep, where you have dreams, or there's some form of conscious existence that continues while you're sleeping. No, it's more like general anesthesia, where you get the injection and it's just lights out. So it's just time ends, everything ends, conscious awareness ends, and that's it. That's probably what happens, but I can't say for sure. And I will say too that I'm not against or opposed to the idea that we might continue on in some other state. I'd be happy to go there if it's an interesting place to go. People really haven't thought this through, when they think, well, I really want to live forever. Well, careful what you wish for. The Christian heaven is celestial North Korea. I'm not opposed to any of these ideas. It's just, what is the evidence for their existence? And the honest answer is not very good.
Yeah, you've got Julian and I debating this. We've been debating this for the past couple days, actually.
It's actually gotten a little heated at a couple points.
Multiple dimensions. Is there some kind of consciousness that goes beyond the 3 dimensions? And I think basically it dies with the physical body. Even if it extends into multiple dimensions, we're not aware of it, maybe, or something like that. But Julian's talking about maybe how the dimensions fold upon each other and there's some connection possible or something like that. Did you want to try to...
We were debating whether or not consciousness in our 3-dimensional world could transcend our 3D reality and continue beyond life in another dimension. So, and I think your book argues against this. It says it's not possible.
You're talking about string theory here?
Yeah, I guess this would be string theory territory.
Well, to go from the theoretical nature of strings, that are below apparently even quarks and are just pure energy. I'm not sure how you get to something like consciousness. It depends on what you mean by consciousness. If we're talking about, self-awareness, awareness, sentience, the sensation of being alive, your thoughts, your feelings, the kinds of things we experience, the qualia as it's called, it's not clear to me what the platform holding the memories would be. That would be the equivalent of what brains do. So we know, for example, that memories are stored in the synaptic connections between neurons, and that they're very complex and probably distributed throughout the brain. And many, each memory is probably distributed in many parts of the brain, and that you can essentially turn the brain off, like during surgery, and bring it way down, the temperature way down, so the synaptic connections are frozen, not literally, but metaphorically. They're not operating anymore. And then you warm the body back up after the surgery, stitch up the patient and warm him up and turn the anesthesia off, and he wakes up. The memories are still there. They come back. Now, we're not sure where they went. They didn't go anywhere. They were just sort of frozen in time. So what the question would be, what would be the medium or platform of a quantum field or whatever, a string field, that would do that? I've never heard a good explanation for that, other than something like, and then a miracle happens, and you wake up in this other place. It's like there's a lot of hand waving in there that doesn't really hold scientific water. It's possible, but anything's possible, I suppose, if you have a good enough imagination. That doesn't make it true.
So you're saying this is unlikely, that our consciousness in this reality would continue in another reality after death?
Well, we know for sure is that if you damage part of the brain, you turn it off, stroke, injury, just destruction of neurons due to surgery, whatever that function was there is gone. It's gone. When Aunt Millie's mind goes because of Alzheimer's, we know what the cause of that is. We don't know the cause, but the plaques and tangles that build up on the neurons die, and when the neurons die, the memories go. They're gone. They don't go they're not floating around in the ether somewhere waiting for the neurons to come back. They're gone. Mm-hmm. And the only way to get back function would be to retrain the brain, say after a stroke, and you go through therapy and you learn to do the skill with some other part of your brain. You still need the brain. The bottom line is no brain, never mind.
It's a funny way to put it. What I'm getting at is that there's two understandings of higher dimensions and how they work, and I think this confuses a lot of people. The old way of understanding dimensions is that they're stacked on top of one another. So there's an infinite amount of universes, an infinite amount of possibilities. They're all detached from one another, and we can't get to any of them. Mm-hmm. In the second view, and I understand this to be the latest perspective on all this stuff, higher dimensions are actually curled up inside of one another on the subatomic level. So we still can't get to any of them, but they're much more integrated than they would be if they were stacked. So our bodies would be like limbs on an organism that's beyond our reality. So I guess the question is it possible if you die in our three-dimensional world that it's the same thing as getting your arm amputated or something in a higher dimension?
Maybe. This gets to the question of what is the self? Who are you? And are you the material stuff you're made out of? Or are you the pattern of information? So a non-corporeal afterlife would require the latter. You'd have to be just the pattern. It's like there's a famous thought experiment in philosophy, Theseus's ship. So Theseus, the war hero, goes off and slays the Minotaur and comes back, and they preserve his ship in perpetuity. But over time, the wood of the ship rots, and they keep replacing it. At some point, there's none of the original wood in Theseus's ship. My analogy to this is my 1966 Ford Mustang was my first car I had for 16 years, and I banged it up and crashed it and replaced it and reupholstered it and painted it, and there was pretty much nothing left in the original. From the original 1966 car, but I still sold it as a classic Mustang because it's the pattern of the thing that matters, not the stuff itself. Mm-hmm. Like in some Christian sects, you are physically resurrected into heaven, but as Julia Sweeney jokes in her Letting Go of God monologue, what if you had a nose job and you liked it? Do you have to get your old nose back in heaven? I mean, what's up there, and how old are you? So that's fraught with problems there. How does a physical body that's just like the body you have now, that's reconstructed, maybe like a Star Trek transporter, God has something like that and beams you up to heaven out of the grave. If that happened, then say I'm almost 64 now. If I'm 30 up there, what happened to the 34 years of life I've had since then? I mean, that's part of me too. It's not like there's a snapshot of me at one age that is me. There is no fixed you. You're a constantly changing entity over time.
Are you familiar with the Aldous Huxley quote, "The brain is a reduction valve"?
I've heard that. I forget what he meant by that, though.
He's kind of arguing for the idea that our brains make sense of things by reducing them into bite-sized pieces of information that can be categorized. And, one indication of this is personalities. So we all have distinct personalities, but we know from Myers-Briggs tests and archetypes and all these other sources of information that there's a set of possible personalities. But this means that there must be some grand potential of personalities which we each individually pull from. So this is kind of indicating that we're all operating on some kind of continuum or something that is finite and set. And it also kind of plays on quantum theory a bit in the way that quantum theory says that there's more than what we can perceive with our five senses here. So I just think it's an interesting idea.
Right. So for an afterlife, presumably you'd want your personality to go with you, not just your memories, but your total self, which would include your big five personality dimensions. That would have to go as well, and none of that is fixed. We have this idea that we're a fixed set of characteristics and memories, but that's not true. That's something of an illusion that we hold on to from moment to moment. Throughout our lives. But in fact, you're a very different person than you were 10 years ago. I mean, first of all, your entire body has been recycled. Virtually none of the atoms and molecules in your body are the same they were a decade ago. So that can't be it. It has to be the pattern of information, but that's not fixed. It's like cloning yourself or copying yourself in those scenarios I talk about in the book. That's not going to do it either, because that's just a snapshot of you. And the moment the clone or the copy turns on and starts living its life, it's going to have a different set of experiences than you have. So that's not you either. And in this idea of like the multiverse idea that, you exist somewhere else, well, that would be true right now, even while you're alive. There's an entity very much like you out there somewhere. Actually, there's an infinite number of them, ever so slightly different. But none of that matters, because your point of view self is not there. It's in your head. So if we copied you, your point of view self, call that the memory self. We copy your memories and put them in a computer or a clone or whatever. Your point of view self is still in your head. So if we do this without killing you, and you're just sitting there next to the brain scanner that just made the copy, your point of view self doesn't suddenly leap into the brain of the clone or into the cloud or wherever the pattern is stored. It's still in your head. And so you're going to sit there and go, no, that's not me. I'm still right here.
This is one of the most interesting concepts, I think, in the book, this point of view self. So even if you took a copy of yourself and you would have all the memories transferred, and use the analogy of the Riker transporter, where you have a second Riker getting materialized from the transporter. So there's basically two Rikers. One continues as if it was Riker, and the other one, is basically branches off at that point. Although, actually, with the transporter, I think the idea is probably it kills you every time and creates a new one. So I don't know how that would preserve the POV self ever. You talk about how with the POV self, it wouldn't even be preserved with, like, if you froze your brain, and then if you preserved yourself and you wouldn't kind of wake up, it would essentially be a copy with all your memories, but it wouldn't really be you, because you don't have the narration of I am this person,
Well, as long as there's a continuity from one moment to the next, even if the continuity is broken by a period of time, that could be a sleep or a 4-hour general anesthesia or a 1,000-year cryonic freeze, as long as you wake up, it's still in your head with that continuity intact, the memories and so on. Not a copy. It's still you. That could conceivably work, although none of this would actually work technologically.
But physiologically, where is the point of view stored? Obviously, I think you would agree it's stored somewhere in the brain physiologically. So I'm trying to understand what the distinction is between that POV essence and a memory, right? Like, so if you create a copy, if it's a perfect copy in every way physically, how is it not including the essence of that POV self?
It would think it's you. That's true. It would say, no, I'm the real Michael Shermer, and I'd be sitting there going, no, you're not. You're a copy. I'm the real one.
I'm Slim Shady.
Yeah. And this gets to the problem of what's called the other minds problem. How do I know right now that you're conscious and sentient? I don't. I only know that I am, and that the rest of you could be philosophical zombies. But I think the Occam's razor, or the argument I like to use, is the Copernican principle that I'm not special. So if my mind is conscious and I can see you have a brain and body similar to mine, then the chances are I'm not the only one in the world ever conscious and everybody else is a zombie. Very likely they all have the same kind of experiences as I have. And that would be true for alien minds, say Martians or whatever, or future AI, something like a data that crosses the uncanny valley and certainly appears human-like. We'd have to assume, I think, based on this Copernican principle, that we're not special, that other minds can be conscious and sentient as well.
Yeah, this is a really difficult concept to wrap your brain around, because I think I'm me, and I've always known that. And if there was a second copy created exactly the same, they would both think they're me. How does that even work? What would that feel like? How does that even work?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't feel like anything. It would just, your spouse, the copy could go home to your spouse, and she would not know the difference. But you would. You'd be going, hey, dude, no.
We're going to put a pin right here to take a little sponsored break. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Sunbasket. We're humans. Cooking is in our blood. We've been doing it for millennia, not only with fire, but with vinegar, spices, and any other delicious way we can conjure up. In a world of restaurant deliveries at the push of a button, we don't cook so much anymore. Everyone knows cooking at home is healthier. Restaurant food is laden with salt, sugar, and fat. Not to mention it can take up to an hour for a delivery. Why not spend that same amount of time in the comfort of your own home preparing a delicious and nutritious meal from Sunbasket, all organic and farm direct? I've tried a bunch of these meal delivery services. Some of them are okay. Most of them are lackluster. The food is often not fresh, definitely not organic. Sunbasket's standards are simply another level. Everything comes pre-measured with easy-to-prep ingredients and organic produce delivered straight to your door. Their quick and easy recipes take about 20 minutes to prepare. You can easily throw together a dish like their super fast Thai turkey lettuce cups or their simple sausage tacos with bell pepper, chili salsa, and queso fresco. Sunbasket sources their food from the best farms and suppliers to bring you fresh organic produce and responsibly sourced meats and seafood. They offer paleo, gluten-free, lean and clean, vegan, Mediterranean options, and more. Mix and match from any of their 18 weekly recipes or skip or cancel anytime. They're giving our listeners a special deal today. Go to sunbasket.com/spellbound and get $35 off your first order. That's sunbasket.com/spellbound. It's interesting how you talk about people of all different worldviews and religions have the same near-death experiences and they see the same things. You've talked about the tunnel vision that happens, like the big beam of light that a lot of people claim to have seen. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, like on a physiological level?
Yeah, so I have a couple chapters on what are claimed to be proofs of the afterlife. That is, people say, we don't have to imagine it. We know people have gone there and come back, and they tell us about it. These are near-death experiences, or in the other chapter on reincarnation. So NDEs are just defined by this set of characteristics that are common amongst most of them. Floating out of your body, out-of-body experience. Passing through some kind of tunnel, a white light at the end of the tunnel, and when you break through to the other side, there's people or loved ones that have gone before you, something like that. Sometimes religious figures like Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or whatever. I've never heard anybody meeting Joseph Smith or Brigham Young. I don't know what kind of NDEs Mormons have, but I've never heard any good stories about that. But we know that, again, all experiences are mediated by the brain. We know that you can replicate all of these characteristics through different modalities. For example, artificially stimulating an area of the temporal lobe of the brain causes people to have out-of-body experiences. We know this from open brain surgeries on epileptic patients. And you wake them up after you have the brain open and you touch different parts of the brain with electrodes. This is one way you map the brain. There's this little area in the temporal lobe just above your ear where if you touch it, the person says, whoa, I'm floating up by the ceiling now. I'm looking down. I can see you all. And, so we know this is something like decentering, where I could tell you right now, close your eyes and picture yourself at the beach in Malibu. It's 80 degrees and the waves are beautiful, and it's a warm day, and the sand is white and so on. You can picture yourself from above lying there on your towel at the beach in Malibu. We're quite capable of having these kind of fantastic imagery, and so it's really nothing more than that. You can do it through oxygen deprivation, like accelerating pilots in a centrifuge till they black out, part of their training. A lot of them have these out-of-body experiences. They go through a tunnel, they see a white light. This is the deprivation of oxygen, hypoxia, to the cortex, including the visual cortex in the back of your brain. As that shuts down, you get this narrowing visual field. Also happens on the retina.
So seeing the white light is actually a byproduct of oxygen deprivation.
Correct. That's right. Yeah,
that's
right.
Crazy.
The cortex shutting down. That's right.
Wow.
And yeah, now the NDE proponents, they know all this stuff that I just iterated to you, and they say, oh well, but this is the brain's way of traveling to this other place. And it's a little bit, so here we get into a little bit of altered states of consciousness and what that means. Now, to somebody that takes ayahuasca and goes to this spirit world, most people that have done this, they report that it's absolutely real. I had no idea this other world exists. It's real. Now, when I say, yeah, but I think it's just all in your head, they go, no, it's real. And here's how you can go too. Take the ayahuasca.
But that would also be in your head.
So now it's just in my head. But how do I convince you? Well, you do.
Let's try to go together, is what you say.
Yeah. So we go together holding hands or something, and so this gets to, again, it gets to that problem of the other mind's problem, or how, or some of these other philosophical head scratchers, like, how do I know your red is the same as my red? And we can't. I mean, there's no little homunculus in my head that can leap over into yours to look at the screen in your head to see what your red looks like. Nothing like that exists. So we end up at this, kind of epistemological wall, and we just have to say, well, you know what? I don't know what your red looks like, but it very likely looks like my red.
I think one of your points is that near-death experiences aren't the same. And so if you're a Christian, you might interpret it through a Christian lens, see angels and clouds or something like that. If you're a Muslim, you might see Muhammad or 72 virgins or whatever it is. So that's kind of a clue that maybe it's really the brain making up this stuff through our own experiences.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
If you're an Inuit, you might see seals, right? Right. One of my favorite lines in the book is talking about Inuits and Christians going to tell them about heaven, and they're like, "No seals in heaven? I'm not interested."
Yeah. I mean, it just shows you how context dependent all these ideas are. People from completely different cultures are going to have radically different ideas about the afterlife and immortality. So that tells us it's probably not real in the sense of somewhere out there that you go. It's in our minds, it's in our cultures, it's in our mythology, but it's not real.
Would you talk a little bit about, and this is kind of quoting one of your last books, I guess, but why do you think people believe weird things?
People believe weird things because they have to believe things, period. And we're not very good at discriminating between true things and false things or weird things. So the default mode is to believe most things that you see and hear, because usually our causality connection machine in our brain is pretty good. It's good enough to survive, pass on your genes to the next generation, keep the species going. What we're able to do, it's called learning, association learning, connecting A to B, for the most part works pretty well. The stuff you learned in intro psych about operant conditioning and classical conditioning and these sorts of things that Skinner put together. This is the kind of thing that we evolved to do pretty well. And but the analogy I make is, imagine you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3 million years ago, and you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Well, if you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B, but there's no connection. But that's a relatively harmless error to make. On the other hand, if you think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. You've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. So my argument, this is in my book, The Believing Brain. My argument is that we evolved this propensity to assume most rustles in the grass are dangerous predators and not the wind, just in case, because the one error is more costly to make than the other error. And that's the basis of superstition. All superstitious magical thinking, again, Skinner discovered this in the late 50s, you connect A to B and you just assume there's a real connection there. And because more often than not, there is a real connection. And that's what helps you survive. And the occasional misfires, the false positives, the type 1 errors, they're not that costly to make. I mean, believing in your astrology column or your palm reading or whatever is probably not going to get you killed. This is not a fatal belief. It can scale up to a fatal belief, which is why we must combat it. But that's not the kind of thing that can take you out of the gene pool. So it's a relatively harmless thing. And so superstitious thinking, magical thinking, is not the result of broken brains or faulty brains, or in other words, it's a feature, not a bug. And even intelligent, educated people have weird beliefs.
So superstition is just better safe than sorry, is what you'd say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's interesting. It's funny because I could see the evolutionary utility of that, but now we're at this social place where we're all, the world is becoming one big melting pot. We're not just like staying in our, we're cross-pollinating. We're moving to other countries. We're going to Mars. We're going to Mars, for crying out loud. And all of these, religions are, we're trying to reconcile our worldviews within really close quarters. And it's not, it's problematic. It's like the first time this has actually been a counterintuitive mental state for us.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, the argument made by the transhumanists in the singularity proponents, is that we are the first generation that can actually make it. So all those previous generations that believed in Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and all this, they think they're going. That's all silly myth. We're the ones that are going to do it because we're going to make it happen. So this is their argument. Not a bad argument. I mean, I hope they're right. I hope Ray Kurzweil is able to figure all this out and how we can live forever. He has this whole idea that that the average lifespan keeps going up, and that when it gets to the point where the average lifespan increases 1 year every year, if you're still alive and you don't get run over by a truck or you're in a plane that goes down or something, you will live forever. And that, that's called, it's the takeoff point. You take off, and immortality is there for the asking. You still have to pay attention. You still got to work out and eat a decent diet and take your vitamins and all that, he says. I think this is all a bunch of hooey. I don't think it's ever going to happen in our lifetime, much less in the next 500 years or so, 1,000 years, who knows. But it's not it's not impossible.
You don't think the singularity will happen in our lifetime?
I doubt it. By what Ray means by the singularity, where computing power will surpass our own and it will solve all these medical problems and we'll get to live forever. No, I don't think that's going to happen. He's projected about 2040 or so, which would make him, I think, about 90. It would put me about 85. Ray's a little older than me. To me, to be honest, when I see people like Ray or Deepak, who wrote that book, Ageless Body, Ageless Mind, Ageless Mind and Ageless Body, I think it was called, and he looks like he's aged as much as I look like I've aged since I was that age. In other words, we're all getting older, and you can do whatever you want, but it's going to happen no matter what.
What about AI and stuff like that? Don't you think AI is going to help us figure out the singularity? And I mean, do you think AI is not going to happen too?
What I think is going to happen is that AI and all this is going to help us solve more problems and get more people up to the upper ceiling. The upper ceiling is about 120 years. For a whole variety of reasons, all the systems start to fall apart in your 90s or so, and they fall apart fairly quickly. The solution to it is you have to solve all of them at once, and it's way more complex than most people let on that are into this stuff. Aging researchers will tell you, that you can take your curcumin or vitamin C or whatever. It's not going to do anything because the entire system collapses. All the cells stop duplicating and so forth. And if you could solve the Hayflick number problem, that is the number of times a cell can divide before it dies, the problem there is that there are cells that divide indefinitely. They're called cancer cells. So you don't want that. That's not going to be a good solution either. So the most, I think, what we can hope for is that you live a longer life into your 90s and into your hundreds at a fairly high quality of physical and mental health. That's what I'm hoping for. So when people say, Shermer, don't you want to live to be 1,000 years? I go, look, just get me into my 90s without, prostate cancer, and get me, to 100 without being senile and Alzheimer's and dementia. And, I don't want to be in a hospital bed with tubes for, 10 years. That's not life. It's not a quality of life. So if, what the science and technology and AI and all that can do for us is just get more of us up to that upper ceiling with a quality of life. Now, that's not what the transhumanists, they want to keep going, like Woody Allen. He didn't want to live on in his work. He wants to live on in his apartment. They want to keep going. Fine. Great. I do too. But, really realistically speaking, I think there is something to be lost in being so focused on the next life or the afterlife or living forever or living, 50 years from now, you're missing now. We don't live in the hereafter. We live in the here and now. We don't live in the afterlife. We live in this life. And, again, I hope they're right that we can continue on with a high quality life to 200. Fine. I won't get bored. There's lots I want to do, but don't be so focused on that you miss now, because now is all we have.
What about Clarke's third law? Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I know you're skeptical of brain uploading, mind uploading, I guess, because there's hundreds of trillions of connections in the brain. You have to, reproduce the proteins and things like that. So it's super, super complex. Like, it's unimaginably complex, and I think people definitely underestimate it. But eventually that might be possible. Maybe not in our lifetime, maybe not with the singularity. But I guess you talk about how it wouldn't preserve the POV self if you uploaded yourself to a computer. But I don't see why that's true, because if you did it one neuron at a time, one connection at a time, could you not sort of enter a state when you're sort of halfway transferred where you think you're kind of in between, and that, like, is there like a swap? So it's like a reorientation or something like that?
Yeah. It from bit. This is called, you replace one neuron at a time. But see, there the continuity of self continues. So yes, that would work if you're still in your head. Even if you've converted your electric meat of your brain to silicon, say, that would still work. If you still continue. But the idea of copying your connectome and moving it over to some other platform, I don't see how your POV would go with it.
So I kind of don't understand that, because you agree that the POV self is preserved in some kind of physical state. So if you copy over that physical state, why wouldn't you wake up? How is it distinguishable from a memory in sort of a physical sense?
Well, let's say we did it while you're still alive. We scan your brain in a sophisticated fMRI brain scanner. Mm-hmm. We slide you out. We have the copy in the computer running it, and we upload it to the cloud, or we put it in a clone or whatever. And you're still standing there. You're like the original Riker, standing there going, no, I'm right here. I don't know what the copy you just produced is very sophisticated, and it may think it's me because it has my point of view. But really, what you have now are two yous.
Right, but so there may be continuity, but it's just a division of continuity. Yeah, so both would have continuity.
I think so. I think so.
That's a very difficult concept to wrap your brain around.
I know it is. It's a head scratcher philosophically, but if again, think of it like you get a cochlear implant. That's an example that the transhumanists use. Yes, that's right. It's a brain chip, and it's replacing something you were doing, and your experience is the same, or virtually the same, as it was before you went deaf. Okay, fine. So let's say we could do that for your entire visual cortex, and maybe your retina, and maybe we put some sophisticated contact lenses in there so you can read a Wikipedia page for everyone you meet, and so on. As long as the continuity continues, yes, that's fine. I think that would still be you.
This kind of sounds like the digitization process of any kind of like when you scan an old photo, like an old 4x6 or something like that. This is the problem with intellectual property rights and stuff like that. Is like what quantifies the original of any digitized file, because the original is almost irrelevant.
Yeah, I will have to say parenthetically, after I talked about Theseus's ship, it's the pattern, not the stuff. With artwork, it does, our intuitions are slightly different on that. Like, if you have a Van Gogh and you paid $30 million for it, and you find out it was a forgery, the value of it drops to zero essentially.
But in a computer, like if you take an original, Andrew and I were, when we were arguing about your book earlier, this is one of the things we got caught up on, is like, if you scan a 4x6 picture from like your childhood or something, and you want to digitize it, you want to save it forever. It's the same process we're talking about now with uploading your consciousness. You almost don't care what happens to the original 4x6 because it's useless. It might lose its color after 20 years. It might get too much sunlight. It might fade. The digitized version is not the original, but it's like, and then if you make copies of that digital file, it only becomes harder and harder and harder to like the original is almost irrelevant, is I guess what I'm saying.
Is it safe to step inside the Star Trek transporter if you're killed every time?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Star Trek aficionados have big debates about what actually happens in the transporter. And to me, if it's not moving your atoms to the other place and bringing them back, then you have this duplication problem. Captain Kirk has to be killed and reconstructed, and somehow his point of view self goes with him. And this happens 1,000 times a year and in a season. That to me, it's problematic.
One of the topics we've been discussing on the show, we had an episode about, is the universe a simulation? So I thought you might have an interesting perspective on that. It's a little bit related to this as well.
Yeah, it's the same kind of problem. Yes, it's possible, I guess. Anything is possible. But again, what's more likely? Here we have to get to, sort of the Occam's razor, or the Copernican principle, we're not special, or the other minds problem. I think it's related to that in the sense that the idea that this is all a matrix-like simulation would be something like there's multiple universes and an infinite number copies of us out there. And it's the kind of thing that it's so improbable that, as much fun as it is to speculate from a science fiction point of view, I think it's very unlikely to be real. somebody joked that, if it were a simulation, we should see, a little buffering sign every once in a while, or some pixelation or something like that.
Not if we have quantum computing figured out in the future.
That's true. I mean,
still more information than you could possibly store, I think, though. That's the idea, is that you couldn't store all the electron states and stuff, and you couldn't anyway because of Heisenberg uncertainty principle and things like this. But, I mean, the argument behind it is, I think that potentially it is actually the most likely explanation, because if you have all these aliens out there and they're more advanced than us just because they've been around for longer or something like that,
he's talking about aliens,
then, and they have the capability of creating more simulated universes than real ones, therefore it actually becomes like the null hypothesis.
Yeah, I think it was Bostrom that put it at 20%. I think he put it at 50% probability that that we're living in a simulation. It's a reasonable argument to make. I still think it's unlikely. See, again, what would be the test for whether we're living in a simulation or not?
Well, I totally agree. It's unprovable either way. Therefore, it's an interesting hypothesis that is untestable.
I also don't know what the difference would be. I don't know what the difference would be.
Right. It's basically just an interesting idea that since you cannot construct an experiment on something that is outside of the universe, by definition, I mean, I guess we'll just have to keep thinking about it.
Yeah. It's a fun topic, but I just put it in science fiction instead of nonfiction.
Michael, what do you think about people's desire to categorize things in duality, like good or bad, right or wrong? What do you think that's cultural? Do you think that we've evolved to appreciate duality?
Some people speculate it's just a part of our cognition. It's just what brains do. I mean, we catalog things, we categorize things, we do stereotype, and the stereotypes are pretty useful as kind of behavioral guides to how you should act, say, toward other people. So, the problem of prejudice, for example, racism, bigotry, and so on. This is part of xenophobia, and there's a good reason to be xenophobic, because, as Jared Diamond likes to say when he goes to Papua New Guinea doing his birding, he's been doing this for 40 years, and that's how he ended up writing Guns, Germs, and Steel. He got to know some of the indigenous peoples there, and they were just shocked that he was so open to talking to complete strangers. It's like, are you out of your mind? This guy could kill you. And that you run across somebody out on a trail that you've never seen before. The idea of sticking your hand out and saying howdy neighbor, this would be suicidal. That in our evolutionary past, it was probably more dangerous than not to not be xenophobic. In other words, xenophobia is kind of a built-in feature of human cognition, to stereotype people, those who look like me and are related to me and whom I know, and everybody else who is probably potentially dangerous, so I should avoid them. So I think it's something like that, that we just pigeonhole things, we put them into boxes and categories. It's not always black and white or two, but the idea of a continuum, or even something like species, or what is living organisms, we tend to put those into pretty tight boxes. I think one reason why it took the evolutionary theory so long to be realized is because our intuitions with living organisms is that they are fixed kinds. We don't see organisms evolving. I mean, it takes some pretty sophisticated lab work to measure evolutionary change over a time frame we can see.
Well, you have microevolutions.
In bacteria, you can see it actually. We did a biology class, right?
Right. But again, I mean, if you lived 10,000 years ago, just walking around hunting and gathering, you're not going to see species change. It looks like they're fixed.
Right, but there is no such thing as a species. This is just a category in our mind as well. Like everything's transitory.
Well, that's kind of right. Yes, I mean it depends how you define a species. If you mean reproductively isolated from other such kinds, then there are species, and they don't change very quickly, so you don't see it. So, the creationist model, that hypothesis, that intuition feels right, and that's why it took so long. I mean, all the way up to Darwin to figure it out. I mean, there were theories of evolution before Darwin, but it took some kind of mechanism to convince the intellectual community this is a viable theory. Natural selection. That's what it took. Otherwise, Jared points out, as does Ernst Mayr, who also did work in Papua New Guinea, that the natives classify bird species, for example, pretty similarly to the way Western ornithologists do. So their intuitions about what is a fixed kind pretty closely matches how a modern scientific ornithologist would categorize and classify bird species. So there seems to be something of a match there that could be true in the sense, even though over 1 million years those birds will change. We only live a few decades, 40 and 10 years, 20 years or so. That's it. So you're not going to see much happening there. So our intuitions about the physical world as well are very inaccurate at extreme levels of scientific measurement. Speed of light, glacially slow glaciers, plate tectonics, expanding universe. These are the kinds of things that we have no experience in real life with. So they take some pretty sophisticated scientific modeling, metaphors. You talked about string theory. I mean, none of this quantum physics, none of this makes sense, in an ancestral African savanna environment that we evolved in.
We're used to middle-sized things, basically. As Dawkins says, I think we see through a narrow slit in the electromagnetic spectrum. And
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Michael's got his own podcast. You can check that out. Science Salon is what it's called. If you like Spellbound, you'll definitely want to check out Science Salon. You can also check out his book, Heavens on Earth. We were kind of talking about that a little bit today. Skeptic.com is the website for Michael's magazine. It's available in every bookstore. It's one of the only magazines to have survived the digital age, and that is no small feat. If you're enjoying this podcast and you want to support us, you can subscribe or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or CastBox. That actually does help tremendously. If you want to send me an email, you can do that. hello@spellboundshow.com. Most people just tweet me @Julian was here. I check it sometimes, not frequently. This has been Spellbound. I'm Julian Smith. Thanks so much for listening. See you guys next Monday.